Welcome to Speculative Sandbox, your audio playground for creative storytellers. My name is Vickie, and in each episode, I and a guest will unpack a trope with an eye for world building, character development, or narrative structures. You can also join the conversation on TikTok and Instagram. For those times when the real world just doesn't cut it, let's get lost in a fictional one. All right, Damien Alameda, I'm so excited to have you back here at the podcast for Speculative Sandbox. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, Vickie. Thank you so much for having me back. How are you doing? Happy New Year, by the way.
Oh, Happy New Year. I'm doing great. We're filming this right now in the middle of January. I'm sure our listeners are listening to it much later than that. I've been thinking a lot about new beginnings, new projects, new resolutions. What about you?
Um, just trying to stay focused and keep my tunnel vision because if I let my head get a little bit too wobbly and start seeing left and right a little bit too much, I drive myself crazy. That's
Yeah.
all. I'm just going to say it like that. You
Okay.
know what I mean? So if staying in the lane is my thing, then that's what I'm trying to do. Just trying to like push forward, you know?
Okay. That's awesome.
Happy thoughts, white clouds and bunnies,
There
as
you
naive
go.
as that sounds.
I love that. Okay. One of the things I'm focusing on right now is I am trying to read more books blindly, like blind book box almost. I did that over Christmas. It ended up being a fantastic experience. I had zero expectations going into these books, and I ended up learning so much about it. I felt very immersed in the moment. So I think I want to do more of that throughout the year.
I love. What book did you enjoy most?
Intermezzo by Sally Rooney was one of them. That one was phenomenal. I haven't been a big literary reader. I usually stick in genre commercial, but this was my first time where I was like, okay, let's really dedicate ourselves to something literary. And so the book tender or the owner of Stack's Book Club who put the blind box together for me knew that was one of my goals and recommended it to me. And I just I ate it up in 2 days. It was a pretty big book. And it was a little challenging because she doesn't use quotation marks for her dialogue. It's a very stream of consciousness. Is a little difficult at first,
Sounds
but
like a
once you
little
get,
Cormac McCarthy-ish.
yes, yeah, a little bit of a learning curve, but once you get there, it feels almost like you're more in their head. So that was neat. And then I read Moonbeam, or no, Moonbound. That was a very interesting futuristic sci-fi where what it's the idea that a past human goes out and then crash lands on Earth and finds themselves 2,000, 6,000 years in our own future, and you get to
Okay.
see how the world has changed since then. It felt like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or even playing Legend of Zelda because the
Okay.
world felt so new, like literally waking up into this familiar terrain. I really enjoyed it.
Love that. I love it. And you came in not knowing anything about the books,
Correct. Yes. I was like,
so recommended.
yeah, I just trust the person who made the choices, trust fate, and see where I go. And it was great.
I love it.
So, you and I are here today to talk about Avenging Angels, the Avenging Angel trip, which is one of my favorites. But before we do so, can you please introduce yourself again to our listeners and share any recent projects you've got?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Damien Alameda, and the last time I was here, I had started a YouTube channel called First Pages, which has undergone by the time that this recording hits, has undergone some changes significantly. First Pages has now turned into Slade Pages. And
Ooh,
whereas First Pages took kind of a broad approach to all genres of fiction and nonfiction, Slade Pages, like I said, tunnel vision, right? Narrowing my focus to kind of the genre that I enjoy the most, which are thrillers. So
okay.
we're talking about Avenging Angels. I mean, this channel is a focus on the good bad guys, the bad good guys, the morally gray, everyone in between, avenging angels, anti-heroes, assassins, all of it combined. So Slade Pages on YouTube, that's the channel that I'm currently working on building.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see what comes out of that. And for listeners who want to hear more from Damien, he and I did an episode last year called Antiheroes. And I feel like that was a really fun debate over all the nuances of being an antihero, what differs them from a hero, a villain. So definitely check that out. All right. So we know why you're interested in this topic. So let's walk through some examples. Let's show our listeners where can they find Avenging Angels in fiction?
Everywhere,
Okay.
everywhere, because it's such a popular trope. Um, I mean, and we actually talked about this in the anti-hero podcast. The first one that comes to mind clearly right now would be Jack Reacher of the Reacher series.
Hmm.
He is like the avenging angel, right? He comes into a situation where someone is hurting or someone needs help, and he goes out and helps them in the most brutal way that he needs to. right, to accomplish the
Hmm.
goal of ultimately helping the person, which is interesting because Lee Child has said before that the character of Reacher, yeah, he's about helping the little guy, but he's really more about beating up the bully, right?
That's awesome. Okay. When
Which,
I That's a
go ahead.
show. Where is it being shown right now? Where can people catch it?
So Reacher season 3, I think, is coming out in actually I think it might be out in February. So by the time this airs, it'll be gone. But it's I want to say it's on Prime.
Okay. And have you
Amazon
watched
Prime.
it? And if so, does it differ much from the books?
I have not seen the second season, which was based on Bad Luck and Trouble. The first season is based on Killing Floor, which is book one, which I have read. And yeah, it stays very true, very true. And the guy who plays it, Albert Richmond, is just, I mean, he's the embodiment of Jack Reacher in terms of all the descriptions that Lee Child uses to give you the idea of just how ginormous this guy is and how intimidating he is, which makes him a perfect avenging angel, a guy that can't be broken.
Does there need to be a sense of anonymity to being an avenging angel in this case, or can it be someone who's known and recognized as this figure?
Um, Ask Batman,
Okay.
because I would say Batman's an avenging angel too, uh, in the way that you know he's trying to avenge the death of his parents by helping all these other people along the way.
Mm.
As far as anonymity is concerned, I don't know. I think it just kind of depends on the character that you're talking about. There's another awesome series called the Orphan X series. Greg Hurwitz wrote it and started out, I think, in like 2016, 2017. And the main character is this guy named Evan Smoke, spelled Smoak, Smoke, super sick. He basically has his own bat cave in this apartment, high rise penthouse in LA, that he's outfitted with all this stuff. He as a child he was recruited into this orphan program by the government and trained to become an assassin. And at one point, he retires from that life and becomes what he calls himself as the nowhere man, where if someone needs help, all they have to do is contact him and he will help them. And the only payment is that that person reciprocate to somebody else who may need his help. And of course, he's an assassin. So you can pretty much guess what kind of help he provides. And the only people he helps are people who are the little guy
Mm.
in need of like protection or, uh, you know, somebody has done something bad to them. They are the innocent. They need their avenging angel to step in and take care of business on behalf of them. And that is the Evan Smoke character. And he's the nowhere man. So there's your anonymity, right? Like no one knows who he is. No, he just disappears into the night. He's Smoke. He's Evan Smoke.
Mm. I do. Yeah, I see what you mean. That's a cool name. Your examples are so noble because they're not just thinking about themselves or thinking about others and saving others. My examples are not nearly as noble.
I don't know. Let's see. Let's hear them.
Okay. So the one that came to mind immediately and is probably the driving force behind even wanting to talk about Avenging Angels is Edmond Dantes in
Sure.
Count of Monte Cristo. And I guess for me to say it's purely selfish might not be 100% because these villains have to represent something bigger as far as villainy and how they affect other people. So Edmond Dantes is a kind man who basically has everything going for him, even though he's not the most well off. He's well liked by his boss and he's got a beautiful fiance. Everything's looking pretty good for him. And he's got some jealous rivals, and those jealous rivals come together. They see a benefit in getting rid of him financially, romantically, all that stuff. And so what they do is they conspire to get him thrown in jail. And when he comes out as a different entity, the Count of Monte Cristo. And I love the book because it doesn't explicitly tell you he and the Count and Dantes are the same person until later, but you kind of just see, you know it's him, and you see him take over and get revenge on all these families. And I think at some point towards the end, he starts to kind of realize that his revenge is affecting some of the innocent people within the family, and he kind of softens his approach. But I love that. Have you read Count of Monte Cristo or seen the movie?
I have the book on my bookshelf. And last time I read it was it's been a minute. When you refer to the movie, are you talking about the French film that came out like a few years ago?
No, and I need to
Or are you
see
talking
that
about the
one.
American film?
I'm talking about the American film that came out like over 10 years ago.
Okay. So a French director remade Count of Monte Cristo.
Okay.
Um, Gosh, I think it might have been pre-pandemic, uh, which I did not see, but I really wanted to see because the trailer is so sick. And
Okay.
it's like, man, like he really captured, and I didn't see the American, who was in the American film?
Um, I think the main character eventually plays Jesus in a different
Well, okay.
movie.
There, yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. You're
Yeah,
right.
I
Right.
know that much. I
You're right.
can't
You're
remember.
right.
That one was very thrilling. I mean, it was, an adaptation. Um, I like that one just because it was my first, I think, exposure to a truly avenging angel. My other example is, and I do like this one a lot. This one's called The Fall of the House of Usher. It's
Yeah,
a
I wasn't
Netflix
familiar with
show.
that.
Okay, it's so good. It's a horror, series. And the idea is, and what it does is it borrows from a lot of the classic like Poe on his stuff. He pulls from a lot of his novels, and so basically what happens is this couple wants to have wealth. They have this pharmaceutical company and all that stuff, so they make a deal with the devil basically for immense wealth, and in return, you can't make a deal with the devil and not have some sort of cost. And so the idea is, you can have that immense wealth and power in exchange that their legacy will end with them and that their direct descendants would die before they did. So they're going to watch their own children die. That's the premise. And
Okay.
so to me, that's more, you can clearly say it's a deal with the devil trope. But what I think makes it such a great Avenging Angels, and I can see it definitely being more altruistic, like your characters are, is these people are awful. These people are awful. So you have pharmaceutical unethical practices. They're pushing for an extremely addictive drug out into the world, and they're not like they know how addictive and damaging it is.
Where have we heard this before?
There you go. I mean, social commentary. And so what you're doing is each episode you're watching the circumstances of these people's terrible lives come together, and then there's always like a brutal death at the end of each episode, and then you see that entity kind of glide in and glide out, and it's just very avenging angel kind of format. That one's really good. I highly recommend. A little gruesome if you prefer cleaner horror. This one's kind of
Sure.
gruesome, but I
Okay.
really enjoyed it.
See, so here's my question. Um, and let's go back to the Dante's thing.
Okay.
As you were describing the Dante arc, right? You kept using the word revenge.
Okay.
For me, revenge is different from the Avenge. Like they don't call the Avengers the Revengers, they call them the Avengers because they're
Mm-hmm.
fighting on behalf of, again, the little guy.
Yeah.
Whereas revenge for me, I feel is like much more selfish. Like you did something to me. In this case, those jealous bad guys took away everything from Dante's and threw him in prison. So now I'm coming after you on behalf of no one but myself.
Yeah.
For me, I think that's where the line is drawn between an avenging angel and someone out for, I guess,
Just
revenge.
themselves.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Yeah. So I think when examining these characters, it is what is the outcome and reason behind these actions that justify going after people, beating them up or killing them in this case.
so one of my favorite avenging angels is Eric Draven, the Crow, and for me, it's like the comic book and the original Brandon Lee film, which I just love. I didn't see the one with Bill Skarsgård, um, but the original 1994 film. I think no, not 94. I think it was earlier than that. Is just I love it so much. But Draven, so what happens with Draven? Draven um, comes back from the dead, not to go after the killers because they killed him, but because they killed his girlfriend, right? So the
Hmm.
crow raises him back up and he goes on this bloody mission to exterminate everyone who had anything to do with the death of his girl. And there's your vengeance, and then there's the angel aspect of it because
Hmm.
he's doing it on behalf of her. And I think that was my
I love
first
that.
welcome into the trope of avenging angels, where it's like, okay, this guy is obviously, I mean, he's brutal and he's violent and he's bloody and he does not care, but he's all doing it for an altruistic reason because
Ah.
he's going after the ones who hurt someone else. And sure, they hurt him, but that's not his motivation. His motivation is to take out them because they hurt her.
So then I wonder if Dantes is, or the Count is a true, well, I guess if you look at the people he's taking down and the impacts that they have on other people, if he's improving anybody else's lives as a result of his actions, I wonder if he truly fits the form of an avenging angel or if he's just out for himself.
So there's the question, right? Like somebody's actions can have a ripple effect to
Hmm.
improve the lives of others when ultimately that wasn't that person's goal. That
An
person's goal was
accidental
to just
avenging
basically
angel?
get revenge, and it just so happens that, oh, hey, nice, congratulations, the dominoes fell in a way that was positive for everybody else, but that wasn't my intention. My intention was to get back at you because of what you did to me. And I don't know
How,
how you draw that up.
can I bring in a real life example then?
Please, and
Okay.
I'll bring one in too.
Okay. The CEO assassin, Luigi Mangione.
Wow, you just went next
Sorry.
level right
I
there.
just went right there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
And at this point, again, reminder everybody, we're in the middle of January. So if any progress has been made between now and when you hear this, I'm so sorry we wouldn't have known about it. Anyway, what are your thoughts?
I mean, you,
I know we're making speculation. Purely, this is speculation. We don't know anything. Do we? I
right,
don't know him. I'm not part of the legal
right.
team. We don't know anything.
All right, well, okay, so let's just, because you know this is going to happen. Let's just say that Law and Order takes this storyline and creates its own,
Okay.
so that there becomes a CEO who's gunned down by an individual. So then you look at the motivations of that individual, right? And let's say that the detectives find out, as allegedly, reportedly, detectives have found out that, um, you know, months before that, the killer's grandparents had died because their claims were denied, and you know, as a result of that, no insurance, no money, and it led to death. And those deaths affected this character so much that it made him burn to the point where he wanted to seek vengeance, not get revenge, but vengeance on the folks who did this to his grandparents.
Okay.
You could see that. You could, I mean,
Yeah.
if we're talking about the classic definition, or what definition that we're kind of coming up with, that's that's an avenging angel.
So then looking at those circumstances, this kind of brings up my next question is how, depending on who's looking at them, and I feel like this is also bringing back our anti-hero conversation again,
Sure.
are they good guys or bad guys? In the case of Luigi, you can argue he shouldn't have done that anyway, regardless of the circumstances that he was through. He's a bad guy. And then other people see him as the avenger of everybody that has been suffering underneath that healthcare system.
So I think this is where it gets like, now we start digging in the weeds a little bit. Um, he's not a hero, but in the eyes of others, he's also not a villain, right?
Hmm.
But he's also the term anti-villain might be applicable here. A guy who has or a character, or Luigi, who in this case had genuine motive to want to get back at up. Well, see, I was going to say anti-villain because he what did he want to do ultimately? Like what he wanted to do? He wanted to avenge his grandparents, um, and he went about it in just a horrible manner, right? In that regard, I think you would classify him not as an anti-hero, but as an anti-villain, a character who is you can empathize with for sure, and you can understand where they're coming from and why they do what they do. And you think to yourself, if I was in that position and if I was broken that much by this happening, could I see myself doing the same thing if, you know, a switch flipped? Maybe. Um, but at the same time, he does such horrific things that it makes it hard to fully empathize with him and get on board with his actions. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think that, yeah, because we can't deny the fact that it has caused a lot of conversation and a lot of empathy for the purposes that he has stated for his actions. And okay, so then for the Avenging Angels, does it have to be?
I'm gonna pause you right there.
Oh
I'm gonna
yeah,
flip this around now. Okay.
okay,
There was a fantastic book that came out in, I want to say like December of 23, called Fear is Just a Word. And it was written by Azam Ahmed. Azam Ahmed was at one point the bureau chief for the New York Times in Afghanistan, who was then transferred to Mexico City. And Fear is Not a Word is the telling of Miriam Rodriguez. Miriam Rodriguez was a mother who lived in a border town, maybe like 2 hours south of the U.S. Mexican border near Houston. She's living near the east coast of Mexico, in a Zeta controlled city. The Zetas being the Zeta cartel, one of the
Mm.
bloodiest cartels in all of Mexico. She loses her daughter. Her daughter disappears, which in her circumstance and situation and location is actually not uh, not too surprising because where she lives, they called them the disappeared sons, fathers, daughters, mothers who just one day are gone
Mm.
and you don't know where they went. But eventually you get the phone call saying that you need to pay X amount of ransom to see them. And what happens is eventually you just keep paying and paying and paying and you never see them. They're just gone. They're
Hmm.
disappeared.
Oh, that's so sad.
And her daughter is a victim of this. But instead of uh, following about it and basically doing nothing, she decides to do something. And through her tenacity and persistence, ends up, true story, ends up locating, I think, at least 12 of the individuals who were responsible for the disappearance of her daughter, some of whom she had known as children.
Wow.
And eventually does such good work that the local police and the state police have no choice but to team up with her to go after these people, right? And their actions lead to domino effects of like bloodiness, violence, but also lead to the capture of the individuals who were ultimately responsible for the kidnapping of her daughter.
Wow.
And this is in Mexico, where, you know, the layer of one, you could talk about the corruption, but also just the red tape that you have to go through to get anything done down there is immense. And because of her just sheer will and determination to seek vengeance on behalf of her daughter and find those who were responsible for making her disappear, and more importantly, find out what exactly happened to her, all of which she accomplishes, she gets it all done. And I mean, if you're looking at a real life avenging angel who stays within the realms of legality, at
Hmm.
least as far as what that is defined down there, she's an amazing story.
That is amazing. What happened?
Fear is Just a Word is the name of the book. If you guys, those
Okay.
of you watching, if you want a good read, I recommend it for sure.
Uh, what happened to the daughter? Is the daughter alive?
So spoiler alerts.
Yes.
No, the
Brilliant.
daughter was definitely killed.
Okay.
Um, uh, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. Wow, that is such a great example. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so in the case of Avenging Angels, both real life and fictional, does it only take one act to be considered Avenging Angel, or does that term imply multiple acts? Or is it just about the span of influence?
I mean, going to accomplish what you set out to accomplish in one act.
Okay.
I think you're good,
Okay.
right? Like, you know, what Jack Reacher has to go help this couple who is being threatened by the Albanian and Ukrainian mob, and he takes them all out in one swoop. We're good.
Yeah. That's all you need to
He
do.
did his job, you know.
So why do you think this trope resonates so much with readers and viewers? Is it because we're seeing bad people meet their comeuppance? Is it justice? Are we feeling like the traditional justice system is inadequate? Someone has to, do something. What do you
I
think?
think it's all of the above. I think it's all of the above. It speaks to our innate nature of the desire to write things for not just ourselves but for our loved ones in our community, right? Um, if yeah, I mean, if something bad happens to your mom, right? Obviously, depending
Hmm.
on the relationship with your mom, or just your family or your child, let's say,
Yeah.
uh, your inclination is to go all mama bear, papa bear, right?
Yeah.
It's not because of you, it's because of what happened to your kid. That's an avenging angel trope that I think a lot of folks can relate to. Um, Anybody who has seen injustice done, and the justice thing is hits hard too with your Luigi example, obviously.
Mm.
I take a look at the Batman, the Matt Reeves version, right? The Riddler, right? Ultimately, the Riddler's goals and motivations are actually very altruistic. He wants to shed light on the fact that the city, the police, the government are all corrupt, that the money that was supposed to go to those who needed it most were redirected and funded through other tunnels to go instead up to the wealthy, right? Uh, but ultimately, the way he decides to go about showing the world this leads to catastrophe, murder, and ultimately the flooding of an entire city,
Hmm.
right? Um, but you get it, you understand it, and it's hard to deny. It's harder to, I think personally, and maybe I'm speaking for myself, it's hard to control those impulses when something bad happens to somebody else, especially somebody else that you're close to and care about, because you don't want to see them hurt, but now they are hurt. So
Hmm.
what do you want to do? You want to make sure the other person hurts, or the other government hurts, or the other organization hurts.
Is the power dynamic always such that the avenging angel is coming from a place of disadvantage? Is that an important factor?
Uh, no, I don't think so. Explain that a little bit.
Well, in the case of Edmund Dantes, if we're going to call him an avenging angel, he came from jail and had to work his way up, and he's going against the wealthy. In the case of Luigi Mangione, if we're calling him, if, for the sake of like workshopping this, if you want to consider him fictionally one, then he is coming from a position of someone who's been taken advantage of, disadvantaged of by the system. How powerful do you need to be an avenging angel?
Honestly, I feel like I'm going to talk about Miriam Rodriguez a lot in this thing,
Okay.
just because she was real life, but
Mm-hmm.
she had zero power. She had zero
Okay.
power. She and her ex-husband ran a cowboy hat, cowboy boot store on a little mall near the bridge that would take you up to the border. She was just another statistic until she ultimately wasn't. Until she decided to, you know, literally grab the reins and make the narrative her own and go after the people who were responsible for the disappearance of her daughter. So in that regard, she went from nothing to becoming ultimately a pseudo folk hero in that respect. Now you look at a character like Batman, who again I consider an avenging angel too, and he comes from immense wealth, and that
Mm-hmm.
immense wealth is what helps drive his character to be able to do what he does. The Evan Smoke character in the Orphan X series is another example because as you learn his backstory, as a paid assassin, he was paid handsomely by the United States government. He has money for days that he doesn't need to worry about that ever again, which is one of the reasons why he's an avenging angel because it's not like these people who come to him need to pay him. He's doing it out of the goodness of his heart and because he sincerely wants to help them. So there you have three examples, two of whom come from the higher upper echelon of
Mm-hmm.
society, one of whom was very much low middle class.
When you, as a writer, are now deciding to create an avenging angel, what are some factors you think you need to think about when choosing of either extreme to make sure that you're mindful of their obstacles or, you know, factors, I guess you can say.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is that just what drives them has to be the biggest issue that
Hmm.
you got to come up with, right? Their motive. I mean, ultimately, the character's motivation is going to help guide any story for that matter. Because if you don't have that motivation, then really you don't have a story because then there's nothing to do. Um, and it's figuring out a way to build empathy for the audience, and even more than that, more than empathy, you want the audience to be sympathetic to that character,
Hmm.
um, to understand what that character goes through, why that character does what that character does, and ultimately why it may be okay, maybe just for this one time for the character to bend the rules a little bit because there's no other way to get around it
Hmm.
in order for that character to accomplish the mission.
How is the Avenging Angel trope distinct or the same from a hero's journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, and I think this might go back to the anti-hero discussion that we had before.
Mhm.
Uh, the hero's journey is very distinct in the sense that by the end of the journey, the hero, at least on paper and like in the clinically defined world, the
Mhm.
hero has changed. The hero has started as one thing and ultimately become someone else. Um, and hopefully, depending on the story, that someone else has seen the light and is now for the greater good or whatever, right? There has been an arc. I
Mhm.
don't know if that's necessarily true or that necessarily has to happen
Okay.
for the Avenging Angel.
More like just the
Jack Reacher,
obstacle needs to be met.
yeah,
Just like,
I mean Jack
yeah.
Reacher, like he doesn't change. Jack Reacher is Jack Reacher throughout the entire series. Like what you see is what you get, and that's okay because that's the character. And he's a great Avenging Angel because he avenges very, very well. You know what I mean? Uh, like the Eric Draven character from The Crow, um, doesn't change so much as by the end, like because when after all is said and done, and he takes care of the bad guys, right?
Mhm.
There's a satisfaction there for him and for us as the audience. But it's not like the curtains have opened and all of a sudden he's going to see the error of his ways because in the Avenging Angel trope, uh, really they had to do what they had to do to get the
Mhm.
vengeance, and that's pretty much it. So I think that's probably for me anyway. Is that's the biggest difference between the hero's journey and then I wouldn't even call it journey, but just the road that the Avenging Angel has to travel.
What is more interesting? Who's more interesting in Avenging Angel? Or it can be either, and you can give if you have examples for both. Who's more interesting? Is it the Avenging Angel themselves or their victims from a storytelling perspective?
Um, I guess that depends on who's writing it.
Okay.
I mean, interesting.
For,
Have
so,
you
for
ever?
example, The Fall of the House of Usher,
Okay,
they seem to emphasize more on the journey of the victim leading up to the point in which they meet their comeuppance.
can you give an
Because
example?
so there's one, and it's been a while since I've watched it, but one of them is one of the characters. They're just a terrible, terrible person, right? You get to know why they're a terrible, terrible person, and they end up repurposing a warehouse into like a club or something like that. And then by the end of it, what happened? Like you're wondering, okay, how is this person gonna meet their end? And it turns out that the sprinkler system is replaced with acid or something. And so when everyone's
That's so
dancing on the ground, and I think, and again, it's been a while since I watched it. I remember being so mesmerized when I first saw it too. That of course it turns on when everyone's dancing and they all die terribly that way. But it was more about for me at least, the viewer going on a journey with that character and getting to know them and why they're bad and part of the family and what they've done and then the ending. And then at the end, that's when I remember they say, or at some point they have the woman walk through and she's got like a weird face, and that's when you recognize her presence is there. But hers is more symbolic. The Avenging Angel is more symbolic. The whole story plot line surrounds the victim. And each episode is about a different victim. Another case was one of the victims started to get obsessed with hearing a cat meowing in the walls. And he starts to slowly lose his mind as he keeps trying to find the cat in the walls, and there's no cat in the walls. That's another Poe reference, literary reference.
gonna say.
So yeah, just fun stuff like that makes it more entertaining.
How how it definitely makes it more entertaining. How ingrained are you with the victim? Like by the end of it and when they meet their comeuppance, do you feel anything as a result of that?
Oh gosh. I think there's supposed to be some satisfaction, but also there's a degree, I mean, because it's horror. So it's supposed to be this degree of like fascination, but also kind of, ugh. And, people watch it because they like the gore.
Who ultimately is the Avenging Angel in the story then?
It's the supernatural being that
Okay.
did the deal with the parents.
Okay, gotcha.
And so that she's kind of carrying out her vengeance. And again, it's been a long time since I watched it and kind of going off of my memory here. But in that case, while she was very interesting symbolically, and she is the ribbon that ties all the episodes together, But each episode seems to be dedicated to each family. Really go into it, and then you watch how they meet their end.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. So in that vein, Sicario,
Hmm.
um, 2015, uh, Taylor Sheridan's first script be made into a film. Um, the character of Alejandro, played by Benicio del Toro, he's an avenging angel.
Okay.
He is a government assassin who has one motivation and one motivation only, and it is the only thing that drives him to seek revenge on the leader of the cartel who killed his child and his wife. All right. That's it. Like that's he is the bulldog, or he is the German shepherd that is chained up, that the government basically cuts the leash off of and sends out
Okay.
to take care of business. Early on, you are introduced to a police officer who, and the way you're introduced to him is he wakes up, and you meet him and you see his relationship with his son. His son's a big soccer fan. There's a very loving, connected relationship between them. It's strong. You can tell how much the son kind of looks up to him. Um, it might not be so strong with him and his wife, but there is, especially me being a dad, you can appreciate the fact that there is a closeness there. There is a bond there. And it's made to convey this guy who, you know, eh, he's pretty much a regular guy who happens as a police officer. But the thing that makes it special is this relationship he has with his son. Okay. So
Hmm.
now you're like, okay, I get that. And I can appreciate that. And then you discover he's a corrupt cop, right? And he is a corrupt cop underneath the umbrella of the same cartel that
Mm.
did the murders against Alejandro's family. And again, spoiler alert, the cop most definitely meets his end,
Okay.
right? At the hands of who else but Alejandro.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because at one point, at the beginning there, you have a connection with him. There's a familial connection that, um, at least for me, I could appreciate and understand and relate to. Same time, you got the German Shepherd off the leash, who has every reason to want to hurt the guy that you may or may not have just had a little bit of connection with. And does that make Alejandro less, I guess, sympathetic for what he does? That depends on the viewer, to be honest.
Ooh,
Uh, and I think that depends on where you stand. For me personally, um, I'm cold blooded like that. So the dude
really
kind of
good.
got his comeuppance. Like, you know what I mean? I feel bad for the kid. No more soccer practices anymore. Uh, but Alejandro is driven so much by this bloodlust because of what happened to his family that
Mm,
nothing's going to stop him. And if you are associated with the folks who did this, the police officer, you aren't going to get in his way either.
mm.
And for the sake of the viewer, okay, yeah, I get it.
Yeah. It's an interesting complexity to know and understand the motives and details of the victim, of the eventual victim, and the motives of the avenging angel. I think that's what makes it, soups are more interesting with more ingredients, at
Oh,
least to
yeah,
me.
all the time, all the time.
Yeah. So, all right, Damien, I'm so sorry we're coming up on time. We always have such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I love
Is
it.
there anything you'd like to promote or final remarks before we go?
No, just again, Vickie, you're looking spectacular. Thank you again so much for having me on here. This is a blast. I can't wait to figure out a way to kind of finagle my way back onto Speculative Sandbox, and again, the YouTube channel. By the time this podcast is up, it'll hopefully be up as well. But we'll be Slade Pages, Slayed Pages, Pages, and you'll be able to find it on YouTube and Instagram, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, again, thank you. And to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in, and we'll have another episode for you next week. Bye.